So my name is Allison Hare. I'm the Community and Public Health Programming Coordinator for National AMSA, and I'm also a student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Today our speaker is Dr. Todd Sack on behalf of Physicians for Social Responsibility and the Florida Medical Association. Dr. Sack is a gastroenterologist practicing at a free clinic in Jacksonville, Florida. He is a graduate of Yale College and the University of California School of Medicine, San Francisco, where he was also assistant professor of medicine. Among his environmental health work, he has been chairperson of Jacksonville's Environmental Protection Board, chair of the Florida Medical Association's Environment and Health section, where he authored more than a dozen environmental policies, member of the Florida Energy Commission, editor of My Green Doctor Resource for Physicians, and he co-chairs the Environment and Health Committee of Physicians for Social Responsibility. Today, we're going to be talking about adding climate change to your medical practice or your future medical practice. He's going to speak for about 40 minutes, and that will be followed by questions that, as I mentioned, you can write for us in the bar, this kind of WebEx platform. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself, and then Dr. Sack, you can take it away.
Super. Thank you, Allison. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Todd Sack. We'll be here for about 50 minutes, and welcome aboard. I want to thank Allison Hare for her leadership at the American Medical Students Association. I know that among the audience, you are at various stages in your career, some getting into medical school, some already there, some maybe after medical school. And the tips and advice I'm going to offer you today are things that you can use on this topic today, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now. And I hope you look back on this talk and your notes a decade from now and find things that can be useful for you. First, I want to congratulate you. I want to congratulate you for 3 reasons. First, for picking the medical profession for your life. I've been a physician since 1980. It's been a great pleasure every day since 1980, and I know you're going to enjoy it too. The second reason I would congratulate you is to congratulate you for picking an interest in environmental health and climate change, today's topic. And third, I want to congratulate you for joining the American Medical Association, the American Medical Student Association. And I want to talk a bit about that, because as you enter your medical career, I would really encourage you to plan to be a joiner, to join organizations, to just be expecting to pay dues for the next 30 years or so. And the 3 types of organizations I really encourage you to join. One is organized medicine, your county and state medical society, the American Medical Association. These are the groups that develop consensuses for what physicians want to do, and they give us great power. And I encourage you to join, both for the benefit to your profession, and also you'll find in those organizations great opportunities for friendship and satisfaction and tips to help your practice. Second, you'll want to join your specialty association, whether it's the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, or the American Gastroenterological Association. Whatever you end up doing, join the specialty society, both to be influential in your specialty, but also for continuing medical education you'll need and want. And finally, the third type of organizations will be those of your community interests, whether it's an environmental group, which has been the focus of my extracurricular life, or your church group, or some other project that's of interest to you. Join and let that enrich your life. So that being said, I'll leave my congratulations, and we'll move on to what may be the most important slide of this talk. And this is a quote from one of my mentors, Dee Hovind, who's past president of the American Medical Association, who talked about environmental health and said that environmental health determines 40% of the health outcomes for populations, compared to just a 10% impact for the traditional work of physicians. It means that all we do in our offices and in our hospitals has only a 10% impact upon health outcomes, and that the environment, toxins, and the physical environment makes a much bigger impact. And always keep that in mind as you develop your career and as you're talking with your patients. So I have several goals for this talk. And the first is I'd like you to become climate change communicator. And what I mean by that is I want you to be comfortable talking about climate change, whether you're talking to friends or patients or you choose to become a public speaker in this, as I have. Second, I'm going to give you a list of important web resources to file away for future use. We're going to have about 20 minutes on a topic I call Climate Change and Health 1A, kind of an introduction to climate change. We understand that you have already, having come from good schools, some understanding of climate science, but I want you to have some basics that are essential if you're communicating on climate and health to your patients or the public. Next, I'm going to give some tips on how to bring climate change action into your life. And second, tips on bringing climate change action into your medical office. And we'll go spend some time with a website called mygreendoctor.org, which shows physicians and office staff how to bring environmental sustainability to their office. And finally, I'll give you some patient care tips that you can use even now in your interactions with patients. Before I go there, though, I just want to acknowledge my sources, and I'm not going to go over these in detail, but just to point out a few. I tell you my sources because I'm not a climate change expert. I'm not a climate scientist, and I don't expect you to be either. But there are great resources for physicians. Listed here are some actual names of physicians who are experts in the field, and online. There are many, many resources. I'll just point out a few. Physicians for Social Responsibility, the group that I spend some time with, has dozens of PowerPoints and webinars that you can use just to copy and paste to get great slides for your own talks. American College of Physicians has recently came out with an excellent series of policy statements and PowerPoints for physicians. One of the best there is, My Green Doctor, which is from the World Medical Association, probably has the best resource for doctors' offices, and then the many other sources. At the very bottom, I list one called the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. And this is a consortium that just was announced last month, and it's a consortium of about 20 organized medical organizations, the American Medical Association, the American College of Cardiology, and many others who are using this consortium to speak for them on climate and health, and they have also very good resources on their website. So file away this slide, and you'll come back to it in years ahead for resources. These are actual websites, and I'm not going to read them to you. So let's turn to climate science. And why is that? It's because climate change will be the world's #1 health and public health challenge by 2050, if not sooner. So when you guys are in the height of your careers as physicians, when you're leaders in the field, this will be the most pressing problem. Unless the world takes dramatic action very quickly, which we don't expect. I'm going to put this in a little bit of historical perspective. When I got out of medical school, the big challenge was HIV/AIDS, and that's really what we talked about 80% of the time for almost a decade. The current generation of doctors, the big public health crisis is obesity and nutrition, and that's a big struggle. You'll learn a lot about that in medical school. But increasingly over the next 2 decades, climate and hello there. Over the next 2 decades, climate and its health implications will be important both to your patients and in the public sphere and the public policy. So let's talk about climate change and the public health implications. I'm going to focus on particularly implications for the year 2050, because we expect illnesses due to extreme heat. The catastrophic weather events will lead to flooding, storms, and drought. There'll be unexpected emerging infectious diseases and markedly increased incidence of diseases we already know of. Air pollution will have its implications for heart and lung disease and cancer. There'll be water shortages and crises of water quality availability. There'll be mass population displacement, some of which we're seeing now, malnutrition as a result of both crop failures particularly in the middle part of the world around the equator. But an additional problem that we're just becoming aware of is that there'll be decreased nutrient density in the foods that are grown. You've probably seen some of the prognostications that places like Canada, which are cold at times, may have more abundant wheat production because wheat is a product that grows more quickly in high CO2 environments. The trouble is that the nutrient density falls with high carbon. So yes, there may be more wheat grown in Canada, but the nutrient densities of protein and carbohydrates and vitamins may drop as much as half. That's something very frightening. You'll be reading about that in the years ahead, so watch that literature carefully. And finally, war, we're already seeing, and we'll talk about that a bit more. So let's talk about some of these topics with climate change and health 1A. I'm going to have just a few slides on the climate science itself. Again, my goal is not to make you a climate scientist, but to make you capable as a climate communicator. And you know the basics. You've probably seen the same slide before, that the sun comes in and radiates, bathes our Earth with sun and heat, that most of the radiation is absorbed by the Earth, warming our planet and warming our oceans, but that some is reflected away. And that as the sun's heat and rays come through the atmosphere, the gases in the atmosphere trap the heat, and that's the greenhouse effect. The most common is carbon dioxide, of course, and it's that trapping of the heat to prevent it from escaping back into beyond our atmosphere. It's that trapping that keeps us so warm and happy. However, as carbon emissions go up, the heat trapping increases. And this slide is to show that over half the global carbon dioxide emissions were released since 1988. So this is really a problem of my generation. Yes, we had an industrial revolution beginning in the mid-1800s that began the release of carbon dioxide, but it's really accelerated in the past 25 to 30 years and is only getting worse. There's also the point made by some climate deniers that climate change is not a human event, that it's a natural phenomenon. And I'd like you to see from this slide that something has really changed, something's very different. Over the eons of the last 20 million years when mankind has been on this planet, the levels of carbon dioxide have fluctuated, but in ranges around 200 to 300 parts per million. We're now at 407 parts per million, really far beyond the natural fluctuations that have occurred during the 20 million years or so that Homo sapiens and our predecessors have been here. And it's not just carbon dioxide we're concerned about. If you look at the last 1,000 years of greenhouse gas records, there are a number of very important gases that have just spiked up in the last 50, 60 years because of human activity. Carbon dioxide, of course, predominantly from the burning of fossil fuels, methane from human sources, methane being particularly worrisome because although there's less methane in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, methane has a 40-fold increased warming effect compared to a molecule of carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide, as a result of burning fossil fuels, particularly petroleum, has peaked up. And on the right side of the graph, you'll see a number of industrial gases, mostly fluorinated hydrocarbons, which are highly, highly warming and have gone up as well over the past 50 years. Before I leave this slide, I'd like to point out that our scientific record isn't just 1,000 years. Scientists have the ability to use other resources to estimate carbon dioxide levels and planet temperatures going back many, many thousands of years. Of course, we all know about tree rings. The trees grow faster in different climates, and one can use tree rings to estimate carbon dioxide and temperature levels. But the classic one is looking at stalagmites in caves, the calcium carbonate stalagmites, and one can use their chemical composition to estimate carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and temperatures going back as far as 600,000 years. So we really have to have an excellent scientific record of the carbon dioxide levels going back long ways. And the way stalagmites are measured is to look at the ratio of uranium-234 to thorium-230 isotopes, which helps us understand CO2 levels. The data is really quite solid. And the result of this is that the temperatures are slowly warming. Since the Industrial Revolution, the global temperature rise is about 0.85 degrees centigrade so far. If you look at that, you might ask, how important is that? And the importance is that climate scientists tell us that as a civilization, we cannot live as we do now with temperatures rising over 2 degrees centigrade compared to the pre-industrial revolution era. That as we get over 2 degrees centigrade, the catastrophic changes in our natural environment will really make it impossible to live as we do at present. Many climate scientists tell us that the carbon dioxide trend will get us beyond 2 degrees centigrade, but there's still the hope that we can do better. I want to talk a bit about this issue of climate deniers. That climate change is not sunspots, it's not natural volcanoes, it's not planetary shift. These are the sort of comments you'll hear from climate deniers, and you'll probably come across them in your life, in your profession, or if you become speakers, or just talking to neighbors about climate change. This, for example, is a graph that looks at temperature changes from 1976 to the present, compared with sunspots. And you can see that the temperature is slowly and inexorably going up, but that there's no relationship to sunspots. And this has been shown also for issues like volcano eruptions and planetary tilt. You just can't explain the current temperature rise with anything other than the increase in greenhouse gases. Let me say one more thing about climate deniers. The public is getting it now. 80% of voting Democrats understand climate change is real and want the government to take action. The majority of Republican voters feel that as well. There'll be true deniers always, and currently it's about 10% of the population, and you're not going to persuade them, and I really wouldn't try very hard. Just be confident that the science, the climate scientists are with you in trying to do something. And the data I've just given you is just one reason why 97% of climate scientists out of 4,000 that were surveyed by Virginia Mason University a few years ago, 97% of climate scientists agree that today's heating of the Earth is human caused, primarily from the burning of fossil fuels and by deforestation. Deforestation is a very important factor and may be as important as fossil fuels in leading to the increase in greenhouse gases, because trees and other plants capture carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for us. Now I want to turn to the health effects of climate change that we're going to see by 2050 and gradually before then. This slide is to show you just a simple demonstration of how a slight shift in temperature can make a dramatic change in the number of extreme events that will occur. It says that a temperature shift of just 1 standard deviation for the 1 in 40-year disastrous climate event can lead to a 1 in 6-year event occurrence. And this is really what we're beginning to see, that the storms and the floods and the droughts that were quite rare, the so-called 100-year or 200-year event, are now occurring much more often. And we anticipate that summers will be warmer in the future, and the future summers will be the warmest on record. Today's 900,000 people at risk for hunger could double by 2050. We're going to see significant heat waves as a result of this. This is an example of a heat wave that occurred in France in 2003. And doctors went back and looked at the death rates in France over this 1-week episode of extreme heat, and they noticed 45,000 increased deaths in 10 days compared to the baseline number. The people in France usually don't have air conditioning, and old people often don't have access to shelters. Similar high mortality rates have occurred with heat waves recorded in Russia, in Asia, and to a lesser extent in both New Orleans and Chicago. And I would urge you to keep your eyes and ears open for these events in your life. It would be a neat public health project for one of you when a heat wave occurs, say, in Chicago or San Francisco, to a few weeks later look at the public record of death rates and see if you can identify a spike in death associated with that heat wave or that flood. I'm sure you'll find it. So we'll talk in a few minutes about what you can do to help your patients protect themselves from a heat wave. And climate change is not just about warming. We've talked a little bit about flooding already. Heavy downpours increase the exposure of our patients to diseases. Streams and rivers rise, which contributes to the flooding of homes and businesses. And most importantly, critical infrastructure like stormwater sewers and stormwater systems fail. Floodwaters also become contaminated with industrial waste, chemicals, raw sewage, and other pollutants. And then the sewage overflow leads to failure of our municipal treatment plants and contamination of our water supplies. With that, floodwaters contain disease-causing bacteria, viruses, and parasites. And there have been an increased incidence of flooding and storm surges over the past 60 years, as documented by this slide. Whether you look at examples of flooding in America or Europe or Africa or Asia, the number of events plotted by decade clearly has gone up around the world. Globally, over 1 billion people lack access to safe drinking water. That will go up as municipal public water systems fail, increasingly during storms. 2.5 billion people lack adequate sanitation. And approximately 5 million people globally, mostly children, die from water-related diseases annually because they develop catastrophic diarrhea predominantly, and they simply die. But it's not just flooding. Global warming's greatest threat may also be the smallest. The vectors of disease thrive in the warmer climates, bacteria, ticks, and other vectors of disease. This slide lists a number of vectors of waterborne infectious diseases. Rainfall increases the number of vectors, their transportation, and their dissemination of infectious disease. Flooding overwhelms sewage treatment plants. Water sources become contaminated, and there develop shortages of clean drinking water. Sea levels rise, causing severe flooding and causing our municipal water systems and water purification systems, which often send their dirty water out to the ocean. Those systems often fail during flooding. Higher temperature permits the growth and prolonged survival rates of mosquitoes, ticks, and other infectious agents. Drought increases the concentration of pathogens, and without water, there's an impairment of access to good hygiene. In North America, most vector and waterborne disease outbreaks occur after these extreme precipitation events, and we've certainly seen that in Florida, where I live. There are 6 million cases of waterborne diseases annually in the United States, and 76 million illnesses with 325 hospitalizations and deaths annually in the United States. And as a physician, I've seen many, many, many hospitalizations with these. And I'm not going to read the slide, but it lists the many, many bacteria, parasites, viruses, and fungi, and then the chemical results of harmful algae blooms that occur increasingly with higher temperatures, flooding, and storms. We're all aware of West Nile, Zika on the list, but we may also see many others. So what can you do to help prevent waterborne disease? Well, certainly improving the quality and quantity of drinking water is key, and I want to encourage you to support your local municipal water system. You know, don't drink bottled water. Drink the stuff out of the tap and be an advocate for a healthy municipal water system. I should add just parenthetically, bottled water is not exhaustively tested. Your city water is tested often. In my community, it's tested every day. And it takes 3 bottles of water to make 1 bottle of bottled water. It's just wasteful to use bottled water. Proper chlorination and maintenance of water and sanitation system is key. We encourage breastfeeding in the first 6 months of life to not expose infants to the toxins and dirty and bacteria that may be in drinking water. People need to understand the proper use of latrines. They need to understand the careful disposal of waste products, whether human waste or waste in the kitchen. Maintain hygiene. Hand washing is absolutely essential. By the way, you don't need hot water to wash your hands. Just soap and water and friction is all it takes. Teaching careful food hygiene, to wash foods carefully before eating, and to protect the food from flies. These are things you can talk to your patients about. Immunizations are terribly important, especially to rotavirus, to prevent infectious diarrhea in children. Having strong public health surveillance systems and response systems, so supporting our public health system and having an adequate number of public health officers, members of the Department of Health in every community is terribly important. And finally, health education and doctors on the front line as public health education officers. I want to turn now from water to fossil fuels and air pollution. And then we'll talk about 2 types of air pollution. One is outdoor air pollution, which leads to 3.7 million deaths per year in the United States, mostly from urban exposures. We're talking about increased risk of lung cancer, chronic lung disease, cancer, and heart disease. And then there's also the issue of indoor air pollution, which is really a third world problem, 4.3 million deaths per year, mostly from inefficient biomass and coal cook stoves. We were in India earlier this year where the most common fuel for cooking in the home is the feces that they collect from cows and oxen. They're collected and sold in the marketplace to take home. So 1 cow patty is about a meal for a family living in their hut. But this is very toxic air that the moms and children in the kitchen are breathing. We'll talk about what it costs to remediate this problem. What does clean energy cost? Turns out that clean energy is a good deal. The cost of clean energy, that is switching from fossil fuels to renewable fuels, to solar, to wind, to hydropower, is under $30 per ton of CO2 that is saved. Whereas the clean energy benefits, the benefits of switching to renewable energy are really huge, $200 per ton of CO2, which is a bigger number. Clearly, we should all be in favor of using renewable energy as an alternative to natural gas, petroleum, and coal. Now, the range of the benefit is $50 to $380 per ton of CO2 not created. That's in the United States, though for Eastern Asia, the co-benefits are probably 10 to 70 times better. So there's an enormous public health benefit to not burning fossil fuels, and it's really worth our nation rolling up its sleeves for this investment. Sadly, our federal government and my Florida government are faltering in this regard, but I encourage you to be advocates for renewable energy, both in your lives and in your communities for this reason. Climate change poses risks and opportunities related to health. And I want to make you aware of a terribly important Lancet Commission. This is the 2005 Lancet Commission on Climate Change and Health, which published its results in the Lancet Journal in 2015. And it's a reference probably worth reading. It summarizes from the medical perspective the health risks of climate change. And in their summary, they stated that the effects of climate change are being felt today, and future projections represent an unacceptably high and potentially catastrophic risk to human health. And this was, the Lancet Commission was a commission from Britain, and representing our profession in really stepping forward and saying this is important, and we need to tackle climate change to be the greatest global health opportunity in the 21st century. And why does the Lancet Commission say this is an opportunity? Because tackling climate change really means moving away from fossil fuels, as a species. Human beings simply will have to stop burning fossil fuels if we're going to avert climate change. And in addition to the health benefit of not having climate change, there can be all these other benefits from air pollution, benefits to heart disease, lung disease, and cancer prevention. And really, it's going to make us a much healthier population. So on the topic of climate change and human health in 2050, we've talked about illness due to extreme heat. We've talked about catastrophic weather events, flooding, storms, and droughts. We've talked about unexpected infectious diseases and increased incidence of diseases we're aware of, the effects of air pollution, and the problems of water shortages and quality crises. I want to talk briefly about three more topics: mass population displacements, malnutrition, and war. I have all these on one slide for you. First, mass population displacements. These are already occurring. Refugees from drought and flooding. The world has more refugees now than it has ever had in the history of human existence. In addition to the medical crisis of caring for these people, there's tremendous mental health and mental stress that these populations experience. And I want you to be aware of that because I know all of you will be caring for recent immigrants and refugees in your medical training and in practice. And these people are living under tremendous, tremendous mental stress. Malnutrition, that flooding, drought, and heat will lead to crop failures. We're already seeing that. And there'll be winners and losers, that those who live in equatorial regions will be particular losers because so many areas will be inhospitable for living or growing crops. There'll be some winners, that places like Canada and northern Russia, the extreme southern climates too will be winners because they'll be warmer and they'll be more habitable. But I pointed out already that lower nutrient density is a real fear, that unless we can develop strains of plants that not only grow well in a high carbon dioxide environment, but also have enough nutrients to feed the population, we're going to be in big trouble. I mentioned wars because this isn't just a future eventuality. We're already living among two wars, the civil wars in Syria and Sudan, that many experts directly relate to climate change. How can Syria's civil war that we read so much about in the papers these days, how can Syria's civil war be due to climate change? And there are experts who have looked back over the past 20 years of Syria, which you know has been a country with tremendous ethnic divides and religious strife, but that for decades the country has been held together by people managing to live in their own isolated communities and not interacting much and not fighting. A major drought in Syria over the past 10 years has displaced populations and forced people who normally wouldn't be together to move into urban areas. And the financial strains of the drought have also put economic pressures on the ruling party in Syria, making it harder to keep peace anymore with dissidents. So many people look directly at today's Syrian civil war as a result of climate change. Now we're going to leave the climate change and health 1A and move to the last two topics of this talk. And I'm going to talk about adding climate change to your life. And some of these I hope you're already doing, and some I hope you'll think about in the years ahead. And first, you want to minimize your own personal greenhouse gas footprint in your choices of transportation, whether to walk or ride public transportation or drive a private car. If you purchase a car, to choose an electric car and a low-emitting car. In your choice of housing, to find homes that are well insulated and use energy and water efficiently. In your energy use, and finally in your food choices, to consider being a locavore, to buy foods that are grown locally, to protect your local environment, to buy foods that have a minimal impact upon the climate. Foods that travel thousands of miles require energy to be transported. Now, on this topic, many people ask me about organic versus non-organic foods. The health benefits of organic foods are controversial. In some of the large studies, there really isn't a demonstrable health benefit for eating organic, but there's a huge environmental advantage to going organic because of the benefit of organic foods to the soils and the climate through minimization of the use of chemicals. Second, recycle. Minimize your indoor and outdoor water use. Use chemicals wisely in the home and outdoors. And you can go to many of the resources that I listed for you, particularly My Green Doctor and the American College of Physicians websites, to get lots and lots of tips, brochures you can give to your patients or put in your waiting room, posters you can put on the walls of your home or your office to help you with that. Number two, adding climate change to your life. I'd like you to become a climate change communicator. Don't be shy about commenting upon an event in your life that you observe and that may be related to climate change. Openly discuss climate change and ask those around you to do so as well. Now, particularly emphasize in your conversations the health and economic benefits of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate planning by your communities. You know, we often think that everything about climate change is going to be expensive, but truly there are great economic benefits, particularly if we as a country are the leaders in this and not leaving it to others. And climate planning is terribly important in this regard. Climate planning in two ways. One, to help decrease our greenhouse gas emissions and decrease forestation. That's the process called mitigation. But there's also adaptation, that our cities may need to adapt to be prepared for climate change. If it's heat stresses, it's protecting vulnerable populations such as children and elderly people and those with illnesses, to be sure that they are prepared for heat events with adequate air conditioning and fluids, or to be able to go somewhere where they're safe. If it's a city in the south that might be vulnerable to storms and floods, to have preparations to move population or to protect those communities physically from flooding. They have adequate municipal water systems. All this sort of planning is terribly important and goes under the topic of adaptation. Third, guide your professional and civic organizations. Whether you're a member of a medical professional organization like the American College of Physicians and the American Academy of Pediatrics, or an organization like Physicians with Social Responsibility, or your local church, talk about climate change and guide them to be engaged for your community's protection. And finally, this is straightforward: vote climate. Vote for renewable energy and energy efficiency, for electric cars, for better public transportation, for carbon fees and taxes that adequately incentivize we as individuals and businesses to go for renewable energy over fossil fuels. Vote for parks and trees and bike trails. Vote to end the $5 billion of fossil fuel subsidies in the United States every year today. And vote for those who understand that responsible climate planning for mitigation and adaptation are terribly important. Remember, mitigation is the lowering of fossil fuel emissions, and burning. Adaptation is preparing communities for the effects of climate change. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about adding climate change to your office, and I'll use 5 or 6 slides to talk about one model, the My Green Doctor program, which is a project of the World Medical Association. If you don't know WMA, this is a consortium of 108 national medical societies, from the American Medical Association to the Zimbabwean Medical Association, also Florida Medical Association and the Florida Academy of Family Physicians. And this is the only resource on the web that directly helps medical offices to bring environmental sustainability into their offices. Why do we do this? do this? Because there are millions of doctor offices worldwide. Their offices can cause illness because indoor air is dirtier than outside air, to chemicals and particulates and fungi in the office, but also because medical offices use significant resources, electricity, water, paper, and chemicals. And so we directly influence climate change in this regard. Offices are often high cost and inefficient, yet nurses and doctors are role models in their community, and what we do, others will see us do and want to emulate. And so I look at medical offices as sites for public health information on climate change, that people bring home from the office ideas that they can share with their families. Healthcare's energy intensity is quite obvious. This slide shows that after food services, healthcare is the #2 most energy intensive use in the commercial sector. Why consider office environmental practices? Because this is a site where we can save money. The offices can save thousands of dollars a year by adopting environmental sustainability. A medical office can create an ethic of resource conservation. It can be a way to improve office teamwork and staff morale as members of the office get together in green teams to figure out how to do things better in their office, to save energy, to save water, to use chemicals more carefully. One can create a healthier office. And finally, there's the potential, as I've said, to influence the community and patient health. My Green Doctor is a practice management tool for use by doctors' offices. It can be used by any outpatient office, by any doctor worldwide. It's free at the website www.mygreendoctor.org, provided by the World Medical Association, Florida Medical Association, and the American Academy of Family Physicians. It's managed. This is a service that's managed by physicians, evidence-based, science-based, non-political, and it's the most complete website for medical offices today. No scientific background is needed to use My Green Doctor, and it's available to the physicians and the office staff. And in most offices where it's used, My Green Doctor is really used by the staff. The physicians tend to be too busy. And it has 7 workbooks and more than 120 action steps and education steps that an office can use in their office. Energy efficiency, renewable energy, water efficiency, solid waste and recycling, gun disposal and chemical use, transportation and community options, and even a module on healthy foods for the office. And there are lots of other things there, how it works, tips for building a green team, the role of the doctor office in community health, lots of blogs. There's criteria for an office to be recognized by My Green Doctor and getting a certificate from My Green Doctor and from their professional organization that they can put on their waiting room and proudly display that they're concerned about this aspect of community health. And then lots of examples of action steps an office can take. This is a slide that shows the options suggested under the topic of office lighting. Just simply for an office to adopt a policy to turn off the lights at night, or to change to compact fluorescent bulbs or the new light-emitting diode bulbs, LEDs, to properly discard the fluorescent bulbs so there's not mercury contamination from improper disposal, to install the new high-efficiency T85 fluorescent light fixtures, to use task lighting instead of overhead lighting, motion detectors to turn off lights when people are out of the room, hiring an energy consultant, which can save an office lots of money, teaching the staff, teaching the patient, and My Green Doctor has free brochures that can be given to patients to help teach them energy efficiency steps they can take at home. I'll give you one example of an organization that used the My Green Doctor program, the Escambia County Health Department, which has 5 offices in Pensacola, town in far western reaches of Florida. They adopted this program, and they saved money every month, about 5.2% energy electricity saving per year, which represented 125,000 kilowatts of electricity each year, preventing the release of 85,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide, the equivalent of 4,300 gallons of gasoline that wasn't burned. And the bottom line is they're saving about $14,000 annually. They did this about 5 years ago, and they're still saving more than this every year. They use some of the money to buy a Prius for their delivery of stuff around town. This is the front page of My Green Doctor. It says, My Green Doctor saves you money by showing your office how to adopt wise environmental practices, and one can register in a couple minutes. So I encourage you guys to do that. Now I want to turn to my last topic, which is adding climate change patient care tips. And you might want to keep this slide for years from now when you have your own patients. You may consider in your life having a daily climate message, maybe to talk briefly to a patient about what light bulbs are using, or how did they set their thermostats in their homes for energy efficiency. Are they recycling? Be aware of the issue of heat vulnerability, and particularly talk to your patients about this. Older patients particularly, or patients with young children. Do they have air conditioning or access to air conditioning? If they don't, is there shelter they can go to? Sunscreen use is terribly important. It will become more important as ultraviolet radiation increases. So be sure people are using their sunscreen. And that's a momentary tip you can give a patient to remind them about. They need to be prepared for extreme weather events, whether it's flooding, hurricane, or tornado safety. And particularly some of your less well-off patients may live in neighborhoods that are quite vulnerable to flooding. Are they aware of this? Particularly as a 1 in 40 event, 1 in 40-year event becomes a 1 in 6-year event. Infectious diseases. Are your patients aware of mosquito and tick safety? I tell my patients that they really should never be bitten by a mosquito again. There are just too many risks of mosquitoes, and people need to know what clothing to wear and what hours to avoid being outside and when to put on mosquito and tick protective chemicals. And finally, malnutrition, and we'll be talking more about this in the years ahead, about wide food choices and is the nutrition available to your patients adequate for them to lead healthy lives and have healthy bodies. So, a bit of a climate change recap. Climate change is real and damage is happening now. The human activity emits greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that the gases trap heat in the atmosphere, altering the Earth's climate. That this poses a catastrophic threat to human health, but that with concerted actions, we can create healthy and safe communities for our families and children. And that addressing climate change offers major co-benefits, improved air quality, improved health, and an improved economy. And I want to stress that the co-benefits is a message that physicians can carry to the public in a very influential way. When you talk about the finances of climate change and economic benefits, people kind of glaze over. When they hear that their health is a threat and there can be major benefits by preparing to mitigate and adapt, that there can be major health benefits to our patients, and if a physician is carrying that message, it can be very, very influential. I've seen this over and over again when I go to public meetings or speak before my Florida legislature. So my goal for this webinar was to make you into a climate change communicator, and I hope you feel a little more confident to do that in your life. We've given you a list of web resources that you can come back to years from now. We talked about climate change and health 1A, and I encourage you to save those slides. We'll try to put them online for you, but I've also given you the lists of my sources and websites you can go to get literally dozens of webinars and PowerPoints that you can use yourself. We talked about climate change in your life and what you can do personally to make a difference in your community. And finally, climate change in your office, referring you particularly to the My Green Doctor resource, but there are others on the web, and there'll be more as the years go by, and patient care tips you can add to your practice, whether you're a medical student or an academic physician or in private practice. I want to thank you. This is one of my mentors, Lynn Ringenberg, who is a pediatrician in South Tampa and was past president of the Physicians for Social Responsibility, a group that I know you'd enjoy. If you were a member, I think it's free for students. And again, congratulate you for picking the profession of the healing arts, for your interest in environmental health and climate change, and encourage you to stay involved in groups like the American Medical Student Association and others in your career. Thank you. And any questions, please? So I see one question here. It's from Jessica Mertz. Thank you, Jessica. It says, thank you, Dr. Sack. Could you talk a bit more about the financial cost of renewable energy and the financial benefits? I'm unsure how to interpret the $30 per ton cost and the $200 per ton cost you include in your PowerPoint. Sure. So the $30 per ton costs are the costs of installing renewable energy resources, of actually building solar fields to provide electricity, solar generated electricity to our communities, wind power, ocean power, hydropower. So that's the fixed cost, and they're coming down dramatically. That slide's actually a couple of years old, and they're going to be less as years go by. Currently, the cost of installing a solar plant is less than the cost of building a fossil fuel plant, whether it's coal or natural gas. So that is the cost over the 30-year time period of having that plant. So it's already less expensive to build renewable energy. The savings is the $200 per ton of carbon dioxide. That is, society saves money over the 30-year history of a power plant if that power plant is renewable energy instead of a fossil fuel plant. How does society save money? Society saves money through the health costs, through less lung cancer and asthma and heart disease and strokes, also through saving the environmental costs. Remember that every time we burn coal, we put mercury in the water, and most of the fish in America you're not supposed to eat more than once or twice a week because they're contaminated with mercury, and children or women of pregnancy age probably shouldn't eat them at all. That's a nationwide problem because of coal emissions. And finally, the costs of climate change are going to be huge, and we have to factor that into societal costs over the next 30 years. Hope that answers your question. I'm seeing other questions. Allison, if you don't mind, I'll work through those.
Go right ahead.
Go ahead, okay. Okay, a question about climate change legislation and political barriers. If there's a clear economic benefit and many agree climate change is a consequence of human behavior, what are the biggest challenges to passing legislation? Well, the biggest challenge has been the public's opinion of climate change because, as you know, the public has been flooded with misinformation and disinformation about fossil fuels. These are really dirty fuels. They're all dirty, whether it's coal or natural gas or gasoline, but the public's been told it's not a problem. It really is a huge problem, and the public now gets it. I already cited for you that the majority of Americans understand climate change as a health and economic problem, and they want our society to do something about it. Unfortunately, most of our state legislatures are still dominated by climate deniers, mostly the Republican Party, but not all. We need to vote for and support leaders, whether they're elected leaders or public leaders on public commissions or editors of newspapers, to have them speak honestly about climate change, about the health benefits. And this is where physicians really can play a role. I've been on many state boards and some activity at the national level, and I've come to be very discouraged by what I see in state and national government, and it comes down to each of us taking our own personal responsibility to live our lives, to help prevent climate change, to talk to our neighbors, to do what we can locally. But there will be legislation passed. Maybe it'll take a disaster like the loss of the city of Miami, but the public will eventually wake up. I have a question here I read about. I have a question about balancing care and environmental concerns. When we're considering energy conservation, where do we draw the line between protecting the environment and offering the fastest care? For example, how do we balance the massive energy consumption for programs like Flight for Life, which sometimes operate the helicopters continuously, with the capacity to reach patients and get them life-saving treatments faster than any other method? A great question. It certainly is true that using aircraft uses lots of power, and I encourage you to travel the country and go to meetings and stay educated and enjoy your personal lives, and you're going to use power, you're going to use carbon for airplane flights, maybe to protect your patients, like the Flight for Life program. But those are really small compared to the big picture of energy use day to day. If we as a nation go to electric cars and go to renewable energy and go to mass transportation over fossil fuel transportation, those are the big issues. And in your daily practice, yes, you will use power. Hospitals have to keep the lights on, as your office does too, but we have to do those as efficiently as possible, and much, much more can be done. You'll probably come to know, I hope you will, an organization called Healthcare Without Harm. Healthcare Without Harm, they have a wonderful website. It's an organization that helps hospitals to develop more energy efficient processes, to use healthier foods, to use chemicals more wisely. About 10% of American hospitals are going in that direction. That means that 90% are not. There really is no service being used widely for doctor offices. We have a long way to go before we have to worry about, and we won't have to worry about, helicopters and airplane flight. Help answer that question. You're not going to have to make a choice between patient care and environment, but when you can choose how you live your life and how you pick systems, pick the most energy efficient. We have time for a few more questions. Anyone would like to submit one?
I have a really quick question, if you'll take it.
Yes.
This is Allison again. So were you always this engaged and informed in environmental health? And if not, what were the ways that you were able to do that throughout your training?
Well, no, I was not. I grew up in California, so we went hiking a lot and camping as a kid, so I love being outdoors. But my medical training was pretty a standard orthodox medical training in big urban hospitals, and I spent many years becoming a doctor and then becoming an internal medicine certified physician and then becoming a super subspecialist in gastroenterology and liver disease. So my training wasn't environmentally particularly aware process. When I went into private practice, I joined my county medical society at the recommendation of my partners who wanted all their colleagues to be involved. And through the leadership of the medical society, I was appointed to my county environmental protection board. And it was there that I really learned a lot about the politics and science of environmental issues. I've also continued to go hiking, and I've been a Sierra Club volunteer and did some projects with Sierra in my community. We built a hiking trail, actually, which was a lot of fun. So I would say that environmental, being out in nature has always been something I've enjoyed and became more of my life after we had kids. And then the medical society and medical organizations helped direct me to see how important the environment is, and physicians to understand and be aware of the environment for the health of my community and of my patients. And fundamentally, that's what it's all about. When I go to environmental meetings, I'm often the only doctor in the room. When I talk about health, people really pay attention. I found that, and maybe this is one reason why I stayed involved in this, because my standing up and listening and saying something as a physician lets me have an inordinately greater impact upon the public discourse than would, say, an attorney or an accountant or even an environmental engineer. That's why I think you'll find great satisfaction in being involved in this process.
Sounds great. Are there any other questions?
Well, if not, I'd like to thank Allison again and the American Medical Student Association. Commend you for having programs like this, and thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for speaking with us. You're obviously very informed, and it's always good to inform ourselves as students as well. So thank you. If anyone has any questions, they can email Dr. Sack. I think that email is on the slide there, tsack8@gmail.com. Otherwise, thank you for participating. Have a great night. Thanks, everyone.